Hello, woman beings, and welcome to another episode of the Woman Being Podcast. My name is Emma, and I'm here today with the lovely, incredible, amazing Kelly.
Hi.
And my stupendous, talented, and gorgeous other co-host, Kellyanne.
Hello, hello.
And we are here today for the long-awaited reprise of our episode about the docuseries on HBO Max, The Way Down, God, Greed, and the Cult of Gwen Shamblin. Part 2 came out earlier this year, and as we promised, we're going to give you another episode about this docuseries. We just finished the last episode of Part 2, and we are ready to roll, so let's dive right in. This is Woman Being,
where we explore thoughts and opinions
and have the freedom to change our minds.
Without expectation or judgment,
we will hold a safe space and support each other
as we navigate together in the form of feminine.
God, Greed, and the Cult of Gwen Shamblin. We are here to talk about Part 2 of the acclaimed, well, I don't know if it's acclaimed, of the
but it is
popular, maybe, HBO Max series, The Way Down.
Yes.
So, to recap a little bit, this is a docuseries about a woman named Gwen Shamblin who led Remnant Fellowship in Tennessee.
Brentwood.
Yes, and which is a very wealthy area of Tennessee. And essentially, she ran what was a cult, I would say. And I'm pretty sure we said it was a cult in our last episode about this. If you haven't listened to our first episode about this, you should go back in season 2 and listen to our first episode so you're all caught up. But you also, I guess you could still enjoy this anyways, but that's up to you. You're free.
But before you do either of those, probably watch the series. I don't know.
Yeah, probably watch the series. And then, also maybe just go give us, a review on iTunes. And give us, 5 stars.
Apple Podcasts?
Apple Podcasts.
Who has iTunes anymore?
On iTunes, Apple Podcasts. And then give us a review on iTunes too, I don't know. Maybe if you figure that out.
Just everywhere. Everywhere you can find us.
Give us a follow because that really helps us out and that helps us know what kind of content you like as well, which you guys loved our first episode about this.
Did.
So that's why we're doing it again. We follow through on our word. We are women of our word.
Absolutely.
So, anyways, Gwen Shamblin. We left off at the end of part 1 where both herself and her husband and multiple church leaders had died in a tragic plane crash. They have, since the 90s, used their ministry as a way to manipulate people. She has her Way Down workshop, which is a pun about weight and your weight going down, all the way down, but WEIGH, and lots of body shaming, lots of really toxic diet culture that is also intertwined with her religious, quasi-Christian, narrative that she preaches. And we've heard lots of testimonies from people who were former Remnant Fellowship members, people who have loved ones who are in Remnant Fellowship. And now we've learned even more in this part 2. Which was only 2 episodes, unfortunately. We kind of wish it was more. But it was 2 episodes full of content.
Yeah.
So, ladies, now that we have landed the plane, so to speak. Oh, no. I sincerely did not mean that to be a pun. About their plane crash.
Interesting word choice.
Yikes.
Okay.
Yikes. Initial thoughts.
Wow. I mean, I agree with you. I wish there was more. I was I wish there was just one more episode, but truly mind-boggling. I mean, I can't lie. It's kind of exactly what I anticipated it to be based on season 1, just up a notch. Well, season 1, part 1. But yeah, I'm floored at all of the goings-ons. And in season 2, we see a lot of how they basically cast people out of the group based on if they gained weight back, what their sexuality was. I'm whoa, this person, Gwen, clearly had a firm hold on her whole community, which I'm assuming is thousands of people. I mean, even to the point that she, like, was encouraging church members that they should release custody of their kids to the church if something were to happen to them.
Yeah, so write it in their will.
Yeah,
literally.
Blown.
Literally, my mind is blown.
Yeah.
And, like, yeah, that's all I have to say for right now, but I wanted more. Like, I am so tempted to be like, let's just go on vacation to Brentwood and do some super sleuthing and see what's up. Maybe attend a church service if we can stomach it. Because this whole thing is so fascinating. I should preface, though, that I already am really fascinated by cults and conspiracy theories and that kind of, like, genre of things. So this is, like, right up my alley.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I agree with the sentiment that I wish there was more, almost to the extent that, like, it feels like there wasn't enough. Like, I know that we just went through a lot of content, like, literal just 5 minutes ago, finished this episode, maybe like 20, but whatever. And it just felt like, well, first of all, after Gwen dies, it seems like the church kind of went onto the DL. And they released a bunch of, like, response to the documentary footage of them about, like, oh, we don't fat shame people. We love everyone, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So they did a lot of stuff like that. But it also feels like there's not a whole lot going on at the church right now. And so it felt like a nice follow-up. We sort of see some people come out of the woodworks who saw the documentary part 1 and were like, hey, I have a story to share. But we also saw, like, not a lot at the same time. So I definitely felt like it was a taste. And I feel like maybe in a few years when the dust settles, things start to happen again. There might be some more content to go after. Because it's sort of like, there's nothing you can do at this point.
I hope.
It's very unsatisfying.
More. I agree. I hope that there's more in the future. But also I kind of don't hope that there's more in the future because that means more people are traumatized and, like, having horrible experiences. Yeah. But, like, I'm like, there's definitely stuff still going on.
Oh,
it's just that they keep a tight ship.
It felt a little bit like maybe they were grasping for some more content that they didn't necessarily have. I know that it seemed like they promised a part 2 when they were still working on it, you know? So they were still gathering what part 2 was even going to look like because this plane crash thing just sort of happened in the midst of production.
It was like
at the end.
And they're like, shoot, we need to do more about this.
Yeah.
But one thing that I think is really cool about it is that it did afford them the opportunity to have people watch part 1 and then ask to be in part 2. So they were able to get access to people who maybe wouldn't have done an interview or they may not have even known about if it weren't for part 1 coming out. And I think that's a really cool thing. And that's one thing that kind of, like, is kind of a shortcoming when you're doing, like, documentary work or journalistic work. It's like, well, you've gathered all that you've gathered and then you release it and then it's kind of over. And so the fact that they were able to sort of continue it, I thought was really cool.
Yeah.
And we got to see even more insight. But also with it only being 2 episodes, it wasn't quite as in-depth as, like, the first part was, which was, like, 3 or 4 episodes, I think.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Oh, gosh. But the stories that did come forward, like, are so valuable. Like, I was like, wow, this gave so much more depth and, like, reality, even though there were compelling interviews before, but just like, oh, there are more people. And, like, the more time goes on, there will continue to be more people that come forward and have, like, similar or maybe even more traumatizing stories to share, which is, like, crazy.
Yeah, for sure. What was, like, really surprising to you guys in this? Like, what was a shocking moment for you?
Mine is the fact that Gwen was trying to pitch her own show in 2018.
The Way Down South.
Like,
reality
TV.
The Gwen Shamblin.
That is so crazy. And, like, in that footage, like, we were able to see her, like, doing business and, like, going to church events and, like, kind of behind the scenes of her life. And we saw, like, a little bit of interview footage and, like, some of it, like, there was one point that, like, they were interviewing and I was like, her husband is so weird and he looks like he hates her. Like, he cannot stand her. His face was just like, no bueno, not interested. And then another portion, like we saw her like sitting down at a table and being like, so remind me, how much weight have you lost? Or
like,
saying,
let's go around the table and everyone share how many pounds.
Yeah. Or like, I had the most successful Thanksgiving dinner ever. I didn't have a bite. And I'm like, bitch, that's not Thanksgiving.
That's not successful. That's
No,
unsuccessful
that's-
Thanksgiving, I think.
That's against the point.
And so like seeing like her say these things so explicitly just kind of like solidified to me like how toxic the environment is. It's not just people saying, oh, there were these subtle innuendos. It's like, no, we heard that from her mouth.
Yeah.
Like, and this is like her ethic, if you will. This is her ethos that she's infusing into the culture that she's created, which is wild.
Yeah. The fact that they were able to get the footage from the proposed reality show.
See, I wonder if the church was like, oh, here, have this. See? They're just normal, lovely people. Take a look. And then they just passed along. That's my assumption about
It might have been.
Actually,
like to try and minimize damage.
Yeah, they're like, oh, look how normal and whatever Gwen and Joe are. They're just a lovely couple. And like the stuff that we saw wasn't like exceptionally controversial, and it didn't necessarily prove of any sort of cult.
Yeah.
I think that it was the church's attempt to paint them in a positive light.
Yeah.
Right.
Which honestly, I think a big part of the reality show footage was that it just served as really great B-roll for them to be able to use.
Excellent B-roll.
Underneath people's interviews.
This documentary is like, oh, great, all this content.
Yeah.
Like,
Thank
like
you.
inside the church and inside their home. And
Yeah.
that's fair. Yeah. I don't know. It's hard to say like what was most surprising because there's a lot of surprises in there. I think I'll go with the interview with the girl. Well, the girl and her mom were kind of like paralleled. And they talk about how they get on these like weight loss plans. And it's not like a caloric limit or like a normal kind of weight loss program, but it's like you get 10 bites a day.
And this was the girl whose mom led the Spanish ministry?
Yes. 10 bites a day. And then like the mom at one point was 5 bites a day. And I was just like,
and like bites is wild. Like, just bites of food.
I'm like, I mean, I'd be taking some huge ass bites.
I know, I'm like, how big of a bite can I
like,
take?
how much lasagna can I fit into my mouth right now? Because can you imagine, like, oh, I had
That's crazy.
10, I don't know. That was
Or
wild
like,
to me.
I'm pretty sure I can fit a whole cupcake in my mouth. Does that count as a bite?
Right.
You know?
Yeah, I think I can
There's
get
a guy on TikTok that does like big kitchen spoonfuls
Yes.
of food and like puts the whole thing in his mouth. He's a big mouth.
Yeah, I can take a whole
Just
big
like-
one of those
yeah.
brownie batter, just shove
Just-
it right in
yeah.
there.
Oh,
you know?
yeah.
Like, I'll do it.
Yeah.
And I would if that was the case.
Yeah.
Like, you kind of have to.
Yeah. Or the one woman was saying how she was like not allowed to eat for like every other month.
Yeah, like she
Like, she would
fasted
go a
every
whole
other month
month
with only like chicken
just broth.
Which is insanity.
And her kidney was eating away at itself.
So that was what I was getting to. Is
Yes, okay,
like,
sorry.
They talked, like, she tells, like, basically she had gone to the doctor because of some pregnancy issues or something. And they were like, oh, like, what happened to your kidneys? Did you used to be anorexic? And she was like, well, not exactly. But yes.
Yeah.
And, like, her body was in this crazy starvation mode where it was just, like, her kidneys had been, like, eaten away. And it was going to take like several years for her body to recalibrate back to eating normal levels of food. And which is just like scary.
That's so scary. And like, gosh, there's so many of those people I felt like had a similar story. They're like, oh yeah, my body was so stressed out that everything I put in my mouth immediately turns to fat, and it's going to take 5 years for my body to get back to normal. And it's like these people's bodies have been through so much trauma that it's like years of healing.
Yeah. Well, and that's one thing I don't think is talked about often in diet culture is like the dieting, you can get the weight off, but then you've like tricked your body into like this sort of panic mode where then inevitably most people who lose large amounts of weight gain it back within 5 years. And so it's like your body's like trying to like recoup like all this.
Your body thinks you're starving.
Yeah.
That you are dying.
Because you are starving yourself, you know? So that was just wild.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, and that's the thing too that kind of blows my mind is that this is supposed to be like a quote unquote like Christian group, right? And oftentimes the Christian justification for health is like your body is a temple and you should take care of your body and like, God, gave us this body, so we should, take care of it and be healthy so that we can like do the Lord's work, essentially, right? But they're killing their bodies. Like, they're not healthy.
No.
In any way. They're literally having their bodies eat away at themselves. And so it's counterintuitive, and they're not using any actual like nutrition-based science about how to eat or how to lose weight, because at the end of the day, it wasn't about actually genuinely taking care of your body for the Lord's work or whatever. It was about looking good for the church's appearance.
Yeah.
And that was like wild to me. And like part of me wonders like what was going on in like Gwen Shamblin's body, if we had access
what kind of
to like
kidney damage did she have?
Yeah.
Because even they would drink and not eat.
Yeah.
So they were allowed to drink at parties and gatherings, but they weren't eating. And so they're like probably getting really drunk really fast because they have no food in their
on
body.
An empty stomach for me is like
Woo!
not good.
Yeah, but also that's probably so bad for
your liver.
For your liver to be processing and with no food in your body.
Yeah.
That's so hard on your body.
Yeah.
But I was also really shocked by the moment where you find out after the plane crashes happened that all the children are at the assistant's house.
That's freaky.
That is so freaky.
And they didn't
like
want to give them up.
Yep.
Yeah. Like Gilead, what does that mean?
Handmaid's Tale. Like they like sort of hoard children.
Oh.
Yeah. Like the fact that like the mom of, I forget her name, but Joe's daughter, who's Gwen's husband.
I don't think they reveal her name.
They don't reveal her name.
Was, like,
that's smart.
hidden. Yeah.
That's fair. Good for her. But like she had to literally fly in because she didn't know where her daughter was. She didn't know if she was on the plane and died. She had to fly in, go to the police station and call her grandmother and be like, I need to know where she is.
Yeah.
And the police officer basically has to threaten the person and be like, I will come arrest you right now for kidnapping if you do not tell us the location of the child.
Yeah.
Like, that's how much they didn't want to give these kids up. And I'm like, what are you doing with them? Like, like what is going on? And like, he went in to get her in this big house and came out and was like, that was weird. Like,
yeah.
And I'm like, how
it's
weird.
Almost like child hoarding or something, Like, it makes me think of those, like, what are they called? Puppy kennels where puppy mills, yes, where they hoard dogs. Yeah. Like it really made me think of that instantly because they made it. There's like 15 children or something in this house with this assistant after those people had died in the plane crash, and like nobody is accounting for them, and those children are being left in their wills to
like,
Remnant Fellowship.
Where are their grandparents and where are their like uncles and aunts and like next of kin that should be taking these children? Like, why are they in a...
Also, like, especially as a child of divorce, like, my mom always knew where I was. Like, my dad, she would drop me off at my dad's house, which is what this circumstance was. She had, like, dropped off her daughter with Joe because it was his time to spend with the daughter. And then he left her, which, like... great dad move there.
Yeah, like what the hell?
The only times that my dad ever left me was with my grandparents, and it was for him to go to work. And my mom knew where I was all the time. Like, and there were even times where my mom came and got me from where I was because she knew where I was. And like, it's just wild to me to think that like, that he would like leave his daughter when he has his time with her to go fly to a MAGA rally.
Yeah, that was one thing that I was really annoyed by is they just brushed over that.
Yeah, that was crazy. They were just like, oh, by the way,
they were on their way to this MAGA rally, moving on. And then
I was like, whoa,
can we talk about that?
Yeah, that's one thing I was curious about is like, I don't know if just maybe there isn't a lot of content about that. Like maybe they weren't that active in politics at the time, and maybe they were starting to, and God said nope.
Yeah, well, that's what I was curious because they really don't touch on political affiliation at all. But like Gwen Shamblin definitely falls in the category of what I would believe to be sort of like the religious moral majority, like Trump rally type of religious leader. That makes tons of sense to me. But they just don't talk about it.
No.
I'm like,
Right.
Maybe there's not enough information, or maybe they don't know. I was just like, why did you just drop that and not explain more? So I would love to hear more about that.
Well, I think
People of HBO,
please
HBO,
tell
tell us more.
How many other rallies were they going to? Like, what is their role in this sort of like political sphere? That's fascinating.
We need those flight logs.
I just want to know.
I think another thing that was really fascinating is, so Joe was a pilot and had been gaining different like experience and pilot's licenses through a very short period of time. His ex-wife was also a trained pilot.
Yeah.
But it's like a specific kind of pilot where you can fly in good conditions or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so hearing someone who is like a flight incident investigator break down kind of what was happening was really fascinating to like hear. And he's like, we really won't know until we get a full report back from the investigation of what happened, if it was engine failure, if it was the engine was working fine or whatever. But what was really interesting, because I had this mental picture that they must have drowned because they crashed into a lake. No, they crashed in 8 feet of water and died on impact. And I'm like, even though that's like horrific, I was kind of like, well, they didn't die. Like they didn't drown. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because they were going so fast, right? As they crashed, that it was just
I think it was like 30,000 feet a second.
Yeah,
and 8 feet of water. Add that,
right?
Yeah.
Which is like they were like, that's not normal. He must have been really like
lost
either
control.
Confused or lost control or something
was failing mechanically or
something was happening.
That does really make me wonder: is like how long does an investigation like that take? You know what I mean? Because like I'm sure part 2 took a while to create. So like the fact that they interviewed this guy and he's like, we'll have to see, and then we didn't get to know. I'm like, is that still ongoing? Like what?
Maybe.
I'm very curious to find out what happened.
So it was
there.
last year that they crashed.
Yeah.
And then I guess we're still waiting.
We're still waiting around, wanting to know. I don't know.
Yeah.
And one last surprise was that Michael Shamblin left the church and divorced his wife.
Crazy.
I mean, like, it's not that surprising, but it also was, like, surprising. Like, good for him?
Yeah. I was surprised in the first episode when we saw him say, like how proud he was of his sister for stepping up and, like, taking over. And I guess in my mind, I sort of had remembered him from part 1 as just being the rebellious one. And so I kind of forgot that he was in the church again.
Right.
And I was like, whoa, wait, what? So yeah, for me, I'm kind of like, good, you should get out, Michael. You just need to separate yourself. You seem to be the only one who's not fully brainwashed.
Yeah.
And that's great. That's good. I think you should just stay away.
I mean, as long as he doesn't, like, go out and, like, make things worse in other places.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
But, like, because I think someone like that has the potential to do a lot of damage, right? Like, he could start his own church. Like, he's got a decent following. Apparently, he has a whole music label that people listen to.
Yeah.
And, like, you know, like, people who are like, oh, this guy.
Yeah.
Like, he could do a lot of damage out there in the world.
Definitely.
That's true.
He really could.
Here's something else I'm surprised by.
Yes.
So Elizabeth, Gwen's daughter, who's been groomed her whole life and trained, is Gwen's right-hand person, right? And she is brought up, like, under her leadership, quote unquote. She steps up after the death, preaches a message, and then it seems like, at least the timeline in the series alludes to, that she leads for a very short period of time. And then takes a step down, says leadership is giving her a break. She's got a lot on her plate. She's very strong, all these things, but she's needing a little break. And steps back and basically has been in her house for an undefined amount of time and calls into services and things.
Well, and that, not only that, but services they said are like mainly reruns or like just testimony times. Like they're not actually, there's not a leader at all. Like it's not like they have a staff of people that are like rotating or anything like that. It's just literal like empty void.
Right. Which is fascinating.
It's really strange.
To me, Elizabeth is one of the most interesting people throughout this whole thing. Like, because she's been raised in this environment. She doesn't know anything else. How, like, is she coping? Probably not. Like, with the loss of her mom, her stepfather, people she was close to, and her husband. And is verbally saying, I'm strong, but then no one's seen her for, like, months.
Yeah. And it seems like based off of their website revamp that there are some other like couples that are leading the church and stuff and like keeping the ship running. But honestly, like this is something that I think happens with a lot of Christian churches that are larger and that I think are also honestly like seeking power and control instead of genuine like religious enrichment for people, is that when a iconic and like charismatic leader leaves, it crumbles because the true like motivation behind it wasn't pure. Like that's what I like. Honestly, I know that's like a big jump to make, I feel, but I think that at the end of the day, it's a testament to the fact that Gwen Shamblin was seeking her own power, her own gain, her own like notoriety and wealth, and not really seeking to like have a sustainable like ministry. Like she wasn't like, let me actually try to like enrich these people's lives. Let me actually try, like if she's claiming Christianity, if she's claiming to like genuinely want to like spread a message of the Christ, that's not what she's doing because that's not sustainable.
But I think you mentioned it. That's another thing of how wealthy Gwen was. Like, we're talking multi-million-dollar properties. Like, I think they said she owned like 30-something properties. And they only said the value of like a few. But I'm like, what? Like, this woman is that wealthy. Like that when her and her husband divorced, he got like $4 million or something like that. What?
Okay, so that's one of the things that I really, really want to know is like, what does her ex-husband David have to say?
Yes.
Like, I'm so curious. I want to know all the dirty details, and he's just not a part of it at all. And that's
Are you out
so
there,
frustrating.
David?
Like, David,
David, come find us.
speak to the people. We want to know. Tell us, where are you and how are you?
Are you okay? I'm like, you doing all right, bud?
Do you need a hug?
Like, did he, take the money and start his own church somewhere else? Like, how's
because
that
he was
going?
a pastor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually an ordained pastor, I believe. Yeah. And now he's just poof.
Just gone. Like, where are you, Dave?
I hope living a happy, peaceful life with his $4 million. Because
Hopefully
honestly,
he's invested it well.
hopefully, yeah, get that Bitcoin.
Well, debatable.
Woman Being Podcast does not recommend or do not take our.
We are not giving financial advice.
Yes, nope, that's what I'm trying to say.
Not at all.
Anyways, so ladies, I'm curious. We all come from Christian backgrounds.
Yeah.
We have all been in the church.
Yeah.
We have all experienced charismatic leaders.
Mm-hmm.
Was there anything in this that sort of hit home for you guys?
I would say the fasting always hits home for me particularly. I remember like my mom doing fasts when I was younger, or fasts being talked about, which is a fine practice if you can do it well and healthily and it's good for you. I was never taught like how to do it well or healthy and haven't ever fasted. I was never really interested, but like just the whole idea of fasting is like pretty triggering for me. And like the idea that someone would fast an entire month just like stresses me out. And so the idea that like people were advised to do this for long periods of time for the purpose of losing weight, not for the purpose of spiritual enlightenment or deepening your connection with your higher power, was like really like, oh, like that hits home. I think also like getting to hear more from Gwen, like I've personally observed that a lot of well-known or well-spoken charismatic leaders, when you really listen to what they're saying, they're not saying much. And like kind of connecting that parallel to like what I'm observing from Gwen and like, oh yeah, I've heard people speak like that. That's like not really, you're not saying much, which is kind of like
sort of talking in circles and stuff.
Yeah, you're not really giving an explanation.
Not really answering questions.
That's kind of like sad to me because like, I mean, there's this one woman that basically says, don't judge people that have been involved with a cult. We're not crazy. We're normal people that just were caught at a bad point in our life. And I'm like, yeah, I understand that. Like, I really empathize with that. And like looking back at that in like hindsight being 2020, it's painful and uncomfortable, but also like good to see where you've come from, right?
Yeah, that was one thing that hit home for me as well, was her saying that like we're not stupid because we got into a cult.
Yeah.
You know, like we're not dumb.
Yeah.
We like there's so many factors that go into somebody falling into a cult. And I wouldn't say that I've ever been part of a cult, but I like have looked back on things that I used to believe and I'm like, oh, I can't believe that I thought that, or I can't believe that I believed that, or like, how could I have been like so naive, or how could I have, I feel like I was almost brainwashed in that. And we see people being very brainwashed in this as they are, there were those like really eerie testimonies of like women talking about how like I used to hate my husband's voice, but then I started listening to his voice and now I love his voice. And like all this, it was like, I was like, I don't understand how this worked, but I feel like scared.
Yeah, it's like really creepy. And the fact that Gwen's like, well, you fall in love with what you focus on. I'm like, what? You're just saying ignore this thing that bothers me.
She's prompting Stockholm syndrome.
Yes.
She's saying,
that's what
focus
that sounded like
on
for
this,
sure.
and then you'll fall in love. And it's like, ooh.
Well, especially with how like quickly this church will like pair people up and marry them off.
Weeks.
It's
within
like,
weeks.
It's weird. It's
so
really
creepy.
Weird. Ooh. So I think that was one thing too, that kind of along the lines of what you're saying, was just sort of some of the tactics that were used to manipulate people throughout the process, like just in people telling their personal testimonies, was really validating to me, because I was like, oh, I've had experiences like that. And I felt so bad, you know, and I didn't see it. I didn't see that I was being manipulated.
Yeah.
And so it is validating to be like, oh yeah, that really sucks when that happens.
Yeah.
Like I thought of one example of a woman. She was hired on to do the Spanish way down ministry or whatever. And she had been making like $20 an hour at her old job. And the church said they were going to match her paycheck. And she gets to work and her first paycheck comes out and she's making $8 an hour. And when she confronts Gwen about it, Gwen like shames her, says she's being greedy, says she needs to like
be humble
and just accept what God has given her.
And never expect a raise.
And never. She said, never, ever, ever can you ever expect a raise from and this person's working 40 hours plus all of the volunteering and everything else that she's putting into the church. And she talks about how it's like really damaged her family and everything like that. And I've had experiences like that, obviously not to that extreme, but like the feeling of shame and being like, oh, I wanted more than like God has allocated to me and I feel so horrible or whatever that may be. Like, it's real.
Yeah.
And that
and
hit
it's
home
like,
pretty hard.
no, you're gaslighting me and you lied.
Yeah.
Yes.
You said, we'll match your pay.
Yeah.
I'm asking you about it. And now you're turning it around on me as if I'm bad for asking you to follow up on your word.
Yes.
Like, that is like
from the
textbook.
outside, it's so crystal clear.
Yeah.
But like in the moment, it's not.
Oh, it's so confusing and hard.
Yes.
And like the idea of like, how could I want more? Like what's wrong if I have all my needs already met?
Why can't I just be thankful for what I have? Yeah.
How bad of me to want to aspire to more. And like, I'm like, yes, I understand that thinking. I get that thinking. And I'm like.
But that happens all the time in churches that employ people, right?
Yes.
Is they pay them substandard wages and sort of are just like, well, are you here for the Lord or not?
Yeah.
And
like, do you love God?
Yeah. It's like, are you going to trust God with your future and your finances? Like stuff, all sorts of weird stuff that like is not like accurate.
Or even, here's what gets me. This line gets me. Time and time again.
Lay it on us.
There's no money in the budget. Fuck you. Yes, there is. I see this $1 million building that we're in right now. I see all these people. I see your nice ass car. There fucking is money. You just don't want to allocate it to me.
That's a word.
It's done been said. But yeah, I think that's like a major, major issue in not just Gwen Shamblin's Remnant Fellowship Church. Like that's happened to me. That's happened to people I know. That's happened to people I know within the organizations that I've been. That's has happened to people that I know outside of the organizations that I've been, but across the board, churches will do that and manipulate people into taking lower wages for the Lord. And I think that's the most horrendous bullshit.
It's messed up. It's this idea that like, oh, we're a 501c3. And I'm like, no. Like, you are running as a business.
Like $8 an hour?
That is not a
to
living
run
wage.
a ministry?
Like, you are bringing in, like, that person doing, like, the Spanish side of the business.
Yeah.
She sees those numbers. She knows what's coming in. Like, that, I think that's what's really hard for me, too. Like, under this banner of 501c3, we're like, oh, well, we're this sacred nonprofit. And I'm like, no, but you're running it like a business. You have the hours, you have the marketing, you're doing all these things to bring in profit, and you're mismanaging how that is executed.
Especially if people at the top are benefiting disproportionately above the people that work for it.
100%.
Yeah, so that really got me. But also validating.
Yeah. Because, I mean, people who are, like, the leaders of something, sure, like, I get why they are going to make more money than other people.
Yes.
But when it's so disproportionate and when, like, there's such a disparity, it's inexcusable at the end of the day.
Well, and the excuse of, like, oh, we make less because we work for God, like, that doesn't make...
No.
Like, that's not... Where's that in the Bible?
Reason.
Let me see it.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're going to really, like, the leader of the Christian movement, Jesus, was homeless. So maybe you should be homeless.
It should be the people at the bottom making the most and the people at the top making the least.
Yeah, we should be reversing this.
Yeah.
We're talking about biblical...
The last be first and the first will be last.
Stunning. Where's my race?
Yeah,
exactly. And also, like, I think that it's a ridiculous excuse to put that onto, like, religion and onto God when, like, we actually, like, we're capable of being wise with our money or trying to, like, prepare or trying to, like, use our finances in a positive way. Like, that is more, like, of a, like, healthy religious practice to me than being told, well, you just need to suffer for God and you need to just, like, have no money. But I'm going to be blessed because I'm doing God's work and I'm the leader of this.
It's using God as a scapegoat.
Yes,
100%. It's using God as a scapegoat.
Well, and we love to use the terms like favor. Well, they're just favored. I'm like, no. That is literal, like...
That's called favoritism.
That's favoritism.
They're favored by themselves when they cut the paychecks.
That is...
Exactly.
It's not... Favoritism is not an excuse for some people to benefit more from a system than others. Like, it's just not. And the idea that it's like a holy thing, that this person just has favor with God. Like, it's really gross, actually. And you're actually telling other people in the same breath, you're not favored the same way. You're equal, but you're not favored the same way. So deal.
It's elitism. Another thing that was really heartbreaking to me was, which I wish they had touched on this more and, like, delved into this more, was the man who came out.
Yeah.
And he indicated that they seem to have a conversion therapy ministry of some sort.
Yes.
Which they never talked about.
Yeah.
At least to my knowledge. And
his was such sort of like a side note.
Yeah.
He's like,
he was
side
like,
note, I'm gay.
Like, by the way.
Yeah. He said he was really close to them. We saw photos of him spending time with Gwen.
Yeah.
Spending time with other leaders. And then he told Gwen that he was gay and she wouldn't speak to him anymore. And then he just left the church, which, like, good for him. Like, he shouldn't try to stick to a place that he's not going to be accepted. But, like, they told him, we've converted 4 other people from being gay. We can get you through this. And he was like, no. Which also good for him. He stuck to his guns.
Yeah.
Very good for him. I like that he was like, you didn't convert those people.
Yeah.
Like, that did not happen. Like, God made me gay. This is the way I am. End of story.
Yeah.
There's nothing to do about it. There's nothing to change.
Yeah.
Which I really appreciated, but also, like,
tell me about their conversion therapy ministry.
More. But, like, that's, like, tragic is that there's, like, people potentially living in their church that are just closeted.
Yeah.
Probably married off to some eligible person, deemed a worthy match for them.
Yeah.
And just, like...
Crazy. I wonder if they've tried to marry off Elizabeth again yet.
Oh, my.
That is fascinating.
Yeah.
Because you betcha some of those elders and, like, higher members are like, well, Elizabeth, if you had a good husband again, like,
you'd be able to
ready
lead
to
us.
lead.
Yeah. Dang.
You know that's their thinking.
No, that's so true.
Yeah,
Ew.
it's very in line, especially to that story of the woman who divorced her husband and he got married 6 weeks after the divorce was signed to their babysitter.
Ooh.
Like, and how like the other woman was talking about how they like set men up with women by putting them in their pews whenever the wives decide to leave to quote unquote take care of the children. Like, who's taking care of Elizabeth's children?
Exactly.
You know?
Oh.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying.
Very fascinating.
Maybe that's why she's in her house. She's like, I don't want to do that again. I'm going to stay home.
Maybe.
Interesting.
When I say I'm intrigued, like I am so fascinated by this character. Like I want to just walk up to her house and knock on the door and be like, you good, babe? Like you want some tea?
Want some tea?
I brought you
like
some cake.
A croissant?
Or maybe 2.
Yeah.
But like, here's the thing. I bring you tea, you bring me tea. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, exactly.
I'll bring the tea.
Let's exchange
and you share the tea.
Yeah. You
And then
spill
we
the
can-
tea.
We're going to have all the tea. One other thing that hit home, like literally, is at the beginning of part 2, it goes over like kind of the funeral proceedings and like how there was a wedding the same day that she died and like everyone just attended and smiled and laughed and whatever, like nothing had happened.
A wedding of a bunch of like with a bunch of remnant people in it.
Yeah.
Like, it was a Remnant Fellowship wedding.
Yeah.
Which is like, ooh, we're just going to pretend like it's all, nothing's
like everything's
happened.
fine. Like Gwen was supposed to be here and she's not. Like kind of just like watching sort of the process of this community grieving these leaders' deaths, but like also based on kind of their worldview, not really being allowed to grieve, like being having to be like happy and like, oh, everything's fine, we're good. And we in our Reading community just lost a big prominent church leader to cancer. And I'm not saying anything like weird or negative necessarily about that, but it was weird to be watching that last night when like the proceedings for this other person's celebration of life had literally happened that same day.
Yeah.
And kind of like all the people that have come into town to celebrate this person who has been like a big religious leader for a long time. And like then to like watch this at the same time. And it just felt kind of weird or surreal or something. I don't know.
I agree. It was very surreal. It's always like weird when you're watching a story, but there's like somewhat of a similarity to what's happening in your own life. Like it's kind of like, is this real?
You can't help but draw parallels to it.
Yeah.
But it is interesting thinking about, for example, this idea of like pushing away grief. They talk about how that's one of the ways that the cult actually manipulates people is to push down grief and to not allow people to feel the loss of what's just happened. And in some ways that actually makes the leader, Gwen Shamblin and Joe Lara, like feel almost like they're not dead. Like they live on, you know? They keep going. And then also at the same time, it mandates that the people who step up next, the children who are preaching that next Sunday, are like cannot confront their grief in any way. They must carry on and like keep the ship running because that's what matters.
Like I've experienced that like in, I think, the religious setting. Like I think in an attempt to, I guess, call upon a better life for myself or whatever, like I remember being in worship services or being in prayer situations and sort of like declaring over myself the opposite of my experience, right? And so essentially kind of denying the despair or confusion or like grief or whatever it is that I may have been experiencing, instead being like, no, God is good, and like, like I'm going to celebrate that in the midst of like very sort of dark times in my life. And it's not necessarily the same. I'm not trying to say it's the same, but it does feel weirdly similar.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like if I shift the focus to not what's happening in my life right now, but that God is still good, then you can disassociate a little bit. And it's like a very religiously approved way of coping, which is not coping. It's really bizarre. It's like we don't we don't create a lot of good space in the Christian practice that I've observed, at least, for grief. And like dealing with the really hard things in life that happen and that are part of a human journey.
Yeah.
And it's like, we're not very good at dealing with that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and on top of that, if we talk about like Elizabeth standing up the following Sunday to preach, like,
Oh my gosh.
the spouse of this person that died stood up on Sunday to preach after their death.
Mm-hmm.
Which I'm not saying it's bad, like you can't do that, but it's like, it just felt
It's like, are you okay?
so many parallels that felt like weirdly, eerily similar.
Right. I think also, though, I almost feel like this is like, in general in Christianity, it's like a show of strength almost.
Yeah.
Like I think of like when we lost my grandma, we lost her on a Saturday and the next day was Sunday. And my mom has been involved with children's ministry for longer than I've been alive. Like, and she went and taught the next day. And it's like, whoa, you just lost your mom.
Yeah.
And like, that's just what she wanted to do. That's what felt normal to her. She wanted to get back to normal. But I've always like kind of thought of that, like, you didn't want to take a Sunday, you know?
Well, I mean, and part of this is possibly due to like how people process grief, right? Like in those like early stages of when someone has died, like it hasn't really hit home yet. Like the absence has not yet been felt.
Yeah.
So, I mean, in some ways, like maybe people like sort of feel like they have the strength to sort of, I mean, it's denial, right? Like it's sort of like, this hasn't really happened yet. I cognitively understand it, but my heart has not accepted it yet. And I'm just going to like continue doing what I know. It's like you go on autopilot and you do what is most comfortable. But then like in the months following, grief hits and you have to take a step back and you have to like deal with what's going on and actually face the loss of the person. And so maybe that's a part of it. Maybe it's not necessarily a religious thing, but
yeah, I mean, I think that
a grief thing.
Western culture has a hard time with grief.
Yes.
And we have a lot of sort of unhealthy habits and associations with grief. And there's whole groups of people that are like studying and advocating for better grief management and like a culture of grief in our nation. But I think that when it comes to the like Christian manifestation of grief, I think some of it to an extent is almost, let me prove to you how much I believe that they are in heaven. I think that could be part of it. It's like, well, I'm joyful because they're in heaven.
They're in the
a
best
better
place.
Yeah. And sure, like I can be like, for me, I'm like, I could be, you know, have hope for an afterlife for them if I believe in an afterlife or whatever. But that doesn't change that you lost them here.
Yes.
And that you feel the pain of that emptiness of their loss. Yeah. And so I think that it's a weird sort of twisted way of dealing with the grief to be like, well, they're in a better place. It's like, yeah, like when I had like a friend move, like my best friend in high school moved to Japan. And I was like sad, but she loved living in Japan. Like, but that doesn't mean that like I wasn't still sad about it. Like I was happy for her to go and I was sad for me, you know?
Absolutely. I think that's probably one of the things that makes me the most uncomfortable in general in Christian culture, and has for a very long time. Like I remember being like 12 and going to funerals and people like, we're so happy this person's in heaven, they're with Jesus, they're home. And I'm like, I see their dead body over there. Like, sorry, talking about open casket funerals. And it's like, this is still weird. Like something to me just really feels off about the way we choose to handle that. And it is like you're right, like a kind of denial of like what has happened.
Yeah. I think also, hot take, if you are told that you cannot grieve, if you're told that, you know, you must be defaulting back and back on God and saying, the joy of the Lord is my strength, and denying yourself of like all these feelings that you're feeling. I think positive affirmations are a good thing and can be really helpful in changing your mindset about something. But when it's taken to such an extreme, then when anything happens, your default is back on Remnant Fellowship, right?
Yeah.
Your default is back on that community that has been the only thing that you've been told you're allowed to rely on, because you're not allowed to feel the grief. You're not allowed to go into the pain. You have to go to Remnant, right? And so
it almost like forces you back into the cycle of abuse.
Yep.
Exactly. Like it's just deeper manipulation and brainwashing.
Oh, that's so eerie.
It is. Isn't that the crazy thing, though, about like a lot of cults, specifically with a Christian bent? Like, it's so dark and eerie, but everyone's so happy.
So happy.
And it's like, I don't know, like, people that are too happy, I'm like, I don't trust that shit. Like, I don't believe you.
That's why we're angry.
Angry feminists.
That's why we have this angry feminist podcast to undo all the happiness that we ever experienced. Oh, man. No, yeah. It's very eerie.
It's insincere and it's fake. And I think that same sort of culture is dominant in a lot of Christian realms as well. There's definitely the like stereotype or the, what's the word, archetype of like the weeping Christian or the sad Christian or the very impassioned Christian that maybe isn't quite as happy, but
like
there's
the
a lot
hellfire
of
and damnation type of Christian.
Oh, that's another one. Yeah. But there's also like the happy Christian who's always happy all the time.
Are you guys happy to be here today this Sunday morning?
They have the joy of the Lord.
Because Jesus loves me.
Yeah. The joy of the Lord. People,
there's nothing wrong with being happy and excited about your religion or whatever, but like it's to an extent that it feels so insincere and it feels so forced, and it becomes like an expectation, and it becomes a stamping out of all other emotions, which is how you wind up with people who, like there was at least one person who was interviewed in the docuseries who talked about how she contemplated ending her life multiple times. And like when you're told you can only be happy and you can only present this one way of being to be part of our group, to be in the in crowd, you don't have anyone to talk to about that. You don't have anyone to talk through your emotions, to talk through all the things you're feeling, and ending your life seems like the only way out.
Yeah. Honestly, the whole church kind of feels like a Jordan Peele movie.
It does. You're totally
Especially,
right.
Yeah, Remnant Fellowship turned Jordan Peele movie.
Especially when we talk about like the Black people in the community that are trying to like sort of blend into this very majority white conservative culture.
Yeah. Oh, Gwen Shamblin would be such a great Jordan Peele movie villain.
Right?
Like, imagine her.
That would be phenomenal.
Jordan Peele, I'm sure you're listening. You're a big fan. Hire us to consult you on making a movie about this church that we barely know anything about because we just watched the docuseries.
Because we watched the docuseries and did 2 podcast reviews on it.
We also happen to be really great writers, so we can help you out. No big deal.
Yeah, Jordan Peele, I think you need some help with your writing.
No big deal. Not critiquing, just
like
saying.
It does feel that way. Like it's very Get Out-esque.
It is very Get Out.
Yeah, that's true.
I also just have to mention, like, a quick, like, mental health note, like, because of what you said, is just, like, you can only feel the spectrum of emotions that you allow yourself to feel, right? So, like, if you decide you're not going to feel negative emotions and you're always going to be happy, you will forever be controlled by how much emotion you are not letting yourself feel. So, the amount of pain you are able to feel, the amount of grief and sorrow will determine how happy you can be. And so when you push all of that emotion down, it just flattens you out. And it does cause depression. It does cause anxiety. It causes a slew of issues coming from someone who's been in therapy for 5 years. Not that I'm an expert, but it's like this is one of the things that can be so damaging, and what can make the gaslighting and manipulation so effective is you're not in touch with your emotions. So you actually don't know what feels bad. You can't recognize it.
Yeah. The only way you know how you feel is based off of how they tell you to feel.
Exactly.
Well, and I don't think that's even like specific to cults either, because like I think even now, like to this day will be proud of myself when I react emotionally to something in the moment rather than shoving it down, pushing myself through and like dealing with it a year, 5 years later or whatever, because I feel like it's been so conditioned in my life to just be like kind of maintain the good girl posture, like grin and bear it, and then like have it catch up to me in 5 years.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden you don't understand why you're so sad or depressed or angry or scared.
And so now, like when someone's rude to me and I realize it and address it in the moment, I always have so much pride of myself because it takes so long to get over. Anyway, I'm just saying it goes deep.
It does. Yeah. I mean, in the same way that those women's bodies are going to be healing for years from the trauma that they went through at Remnant Fellowship, like their minds are also going to go through so much healing, and it's going to take so much time. Like Remnant Fellowship has taken away years of their lives. And like, that's tragic. And that's one of the things that I thought was kind of cool, like hearing about why people decided to give interviews to the docuseries was like, if they can keep one person out of this cult, like it'll have been worth it.
Yeah. At the detriment of potentially like very serious relationships with people that are still involved in the organization, like their children. Yeah. Like I'm like, I cannot imagine being like, I am so convicted to speak out about this, and I know it's going to compromise my relationship with some of the most important people in my life. Like I have never experienced something like that, and I hope never to, because it sounds so horrible, but also like what I hope those people are very proud of themselves because they made a very hard decision in doing that.
There's one last thing that I also want to address, which I think is really important and hit me personally in a way that is good, which is just one of the survivors talking about how she remembered some of the parties and like some of the friends that she had and some of the good times and how she like personally had to come to terms with that it was okay to miss it in certain respects, but also still have peace with her decision to move on because it was unhealthy. And like, I think that's something people don't think about when they think about cults is like, they are positive, happy environments, right? With very dark underbellies. And so people's experience of them may or may not reveal that dark underbelly. It seems like more often than not it will. But like the reason people stay in cults is because of the relationships formed and the people that they love and the experiences that are fun and enjoyable and all those things. And so they feel like they're a part of something. They feel like they belong. They feel cared for. Yeah, they have a family. And so like her being able to acknowledge the good things, but like move on and still have peace with that part of herself that missed it. I think I'm just really glad they brought that up because I think there's another person who sort of addressed like, hey, I'm not stupid for being in this cult. And it's not stupid. Like it's a welcoming, generally caring, loving environment until you step out of line, you know? Yeah. So I thought that was really impactful. And I think that speaks a lot to like how cults really function.
Yeah. I definitely admired that as well from like how she said that, because I think that's something I've struggled personally with myself of coming out of some toxic environments or toxic Christian beliefs or whatever, and wanting to really cut myself off from that piece of myself. But it's like, oh, like 18-year-old Kelly needed a lot of love and maybe she didn't get it. Like, and you, like 20, however old I am, 27-year-old Kelly needs to love on that 18-year-old Kelly. And that part of your life is just as valid. Even though it was harmful and hurtful in different ways, it's like it was also really great in a lot of ways. And so I really am glad that you brought that up, actually, because it's challenging and it's difficult. And it's something that, like, I think is really easy to want to cut yourself off from. But it's part of your story. You can't undo it.
Amanda Cook wrote a song about her divorce. She's like a prominent Christian singer who kind of, after leaving a church sort of worship environment, I don't know if she like left, but like she moved on to do kind of her own sort of singles afterward. And she wrote a song about her divorce. I think it's called I Remember the Good Stuff.
Yeah.
And she's sort of just saying like, you know, like, yeah, we had to move on from each other, but that doesn't mean I don't remember the good things about our relationship that made it worth having, you know? And I think, yeah, it's important to kind of come to peace with, like, when I was on the mission field, it was a really rough experience for me, but I also had so many, like, special moments when I lived in Orlando that I don't want to forget about, you know? So, I don't know.
Yeah.
Just one small example.
You even see Elizabeth Shamblin's, one of her, some of her childhood best friends who are brought to tears at the thought that they don't actually get to be her friend anymore because they remember what a great friend she was in high school and like how much they enjoyed spending time with her. And then these people were essentially cut out of her life because they didn't align with Remnant Fellowship and because she was becoming more and more indoctrinated by her mother and was becoming essentially incapable of maintaining relationships that weren't within Remnant. And that was so sad.
Yeah.
And they obviously feel for that in recognizing that, like, yes, this is a toxic environment, but also, like, I loved my friend and I had good times with my friend. And I think about that, like, when I was on the mission field as well, like, there's so many complicated feelings I have around it because my mentality around mission work has changed so much, and what I think is ethical and even godly when it comes to mission work has changed so much. And I look at some of the things I did, and I'm like, yeah, I actually don't think that was the best thing to do. I actually think that was a bad environment, or that we were thrown into something that we weren't equipped for. But I also always say that I don't regret it because I did have good times. Like, there were so many things that were enriching. There were so many things that brought me to where I am today. Like, I wouldn't think the way that I do now if I didn't have those experiences, you know? And I wouldn't have relationships that I have now if it weren't for those experiences. And so, I mean, if you think about it, I wouldn't even live in Reading if I hadn't been a missionary before that. And then I wouldn't know you guys. And then we wouldn't be here doing Woman Being. And so it's definitely complicated to sift through those feelings when you come out of something that you're so steeped in and something that you look back on and you're like, wow, that there were a lot of issues with that, but there was also good.
Yeah.
On that note.
On that note, here we are. Gwen Shamblin, part 2. We did it.
Yeah.
We came around.
Yeah.
We kept our word.
What a wild time.
We sure did. We sure did. Did you guys enjoy part 2? Did you?
Oh my God.
Oh, Kellyanne loved it.
I felt like I was watching 3 episodes of the Kardashians at once. I was here for it. It was crazy shit.
For reference, Kellyanne loves the Kardashians.
I love the Kardashians. If you don't know, Kim and Pete broke up, and Khloe and Tristan had their second child via surrogate on the same day. Poor Kris Jenner. Anyways.
I did not know that.
Well, now you know.
Okay.
But yeah, I thought it was really compelling, really interesting. I think I have so many more questions still, as we've kind of been stating throughout the episode.
Yeah.
And I'm like hell-bent on going to visit Brentwood. So
we're doing Woman Being on the road. We're going to Brentwood.
How fun would that be, though? Honestly.
Everyone send in your emails and fan letters and let us know if this is what we should do, and we'll do it.
And
funding.
Yeah, send us if anyone wants to buy us a plane ticket to Brentwood.
Yeah. But yeah, I enjoyed it. I think to me it felt like it didn't really like it felt like sort of a taste rather than like a deep meaty bite of something.
Definitely.
You know?
It was a bit anticlimactic.
Yeah. Like I really wanted to like get all the tea, and it felt like it was just like a little sprinkle of tea.
Yeah. And I wonder, like, did they just not have the time? Did they not have the resources?
Was the church just too on the DL?
Yeah.
Like I don't know.
I'm like, well, just wait. Something exciting will happen eventually.
I feel like something exciting has to happen at some point.
Yeah.
But it's also hard to beat like the previous like part finale where like, oh, suddenly all these main characters die in a tragic plane
That's true.
crash.
It was very sensational.
Yeah, so it's like hard to follow that up, which is
Yeah.
fine. I'm glad that more people haven't died in tragic plane
Yes.
crashes.
Right.
But it just felt like we didn't really get the answers that I really wanted to know.
Yeah. But maybe that's not the point.
Maybe.
You know? You know, maybe just like woman being, they're diving into the gray. And speaking of diving into the gray, we love diving into the gray with you, woman beings. And we're going to ask you to dive into the gray with us on our Instagram and on our TikTok and on our YouTube channel. You can find us on all those places. And we love being able to talk to you about what you want to hear from us and also about what you think about these things. Let us know what you think about the part 2 of Gwen Shamblin. Let us know what other things you would want us to watch. We already have a whole roster of things, actually, that we're going to watch probably in this next season. And some of them are recommended by you guys. So we are here for you. We're here to serve you, you know? And if you could just like, you know, we'll scratch your back, you scratch ours, give us a little review on what is it? Apple Podcasts, not iTunes. Give us a review on Apple Podcasts because that lets other people know what you think about us. That helps other people find us. That boosts us in the algorithm. And we're just going to shamelessly plug that because we hope that you have gotten something from our conversations and that somebody else would also get something from these conversations. So we're just going to plug that away. And besides that, that is all that we have to share today.
That's all, folks.
That's all, folks. We will catch you guys next week in your ear holes. What?
Bye.
Bye. It's perfect. Don't change a thing.
Don't change